A warm welcome once again for our fourth and already concluding day of the conference Odessa, Cosmopolitanism, Modernism. Welcome to Jerusalem. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all of you. We have a packed program, 3 fascinating sessions ahead of us. Just to let you know shortly about the general plan, we have a session on the Black Sea that consists of 3 presentations plus discussion. Afterwards, we will have a 10 minutes break and we will reassemble at 20 to 6 for a shorter panel consisting of 2 presentations about the 1905 revolution. And afterwards, we will have our concluding roundtable about cosmopolitanism. So this is the program that I'm greatly looking forward to. And I will hand over the stage now to Irena Vladimirsky from Achva Academic College, where she is a senior lecturer, and she will be chairing our 8th session. Irena.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mira. That's really a very fascinating session, Black Sea exchange and migration, and all 3 papers discussing the problems of city as a part of self-identity, and it's very important when we are talking about Odessa, Baku, Bakintsy. It's really very, we can define this like a self-identity, and even Facebook group of Bakintsy in Israel. It's a very, very, very fructive network. And we talk about the differences and similarities of urban, multi-ethnic and multicultural spaces. And each presenter have 20 minutes. Please keep frames of the presentation, and the questions I will be glad to get directly on my chat. I'm very happy to present our 3 presenters. Our first presenter, it's Professor Bela Tsipuria from Ilia State University in Tbilisi. She's a professor of Georgian literature and comparative literature at Ilia University of Tbilisi, and she worked at Tbilisi State University at Ministry of Education and Science of Georgia, and she was a visiting scholar at Lund University in Sweden, Penn University, USA, International Cultural Center, University of Krakow, and University of Michigan. Such a multicultural trip, and she will present a paper, The Modernist Cultural Milieu and the Modern City, the cases of Tbilisi and Odessa. And a few words about our second and third presenter, Dr. Gasimov Zaur, University of Bonn. He studied international relation, international law and history in Baku and Berlin. His PhD at the Catholic University of Eichstätt Ingolstadt and Leibniz Institute of European History, where he was a part of a research team. At present, he is a part of Russian Studies Department at the University of Bonn and a specialist on Russian-Turkish relation, Eastern Europe and the Middle East. And our third presenter, Dr. Vera Skvirskaya from Copenhagen University. She got her PhD from University of Cambridge. And she is an associate professor, also multicultural, cross-cultural and religious studies, University of Copenhagen, with a main research interest in urban coexistence, migration, cosmopolitanism, markets, trade, subjectivity, kinship, and religious change. So, Bela, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much. Let me share the screen, please.
You can share the screen, okay?
Yes, sure. Yes. First of all, many thanks to conference organizers, to Miria personally for getting me into this very interesting gathering of scholars all over the world discussing the issues which may seem more focused on Odessa case, but I believe that today's session and the cases of Tbilisi and Baku will show that there was indeed, and hope there will be in the future, also the network between these Black Sea cities, and we can see lots of similarities and also some kind of commonalities in the process of development of Odessa and Tbilisi. Let me stop sharing the screen because I believe that this will, because sometimes I will be switching back to some pictures that is not that essential to my presentator to have the pictures all the time on the screen. So we can discuss the tendencies of cultural and societal development in the 19th century and late 1910s, with a special focus on modernist cultural activities in two cities on the Black Sea, Tbilisi and Odessa. Similarities in cultural tendencies occurring in multicultural environment of peripheral cities transforming into new cultural centers. So we can claim that both cities, which started as a peripheries of the Russian Empire, had an ambition of developing into new cultural centers, and European modernism and European cultural development, adopting European cultural tendencies, supported this process of filling it themselves and transforming themselves into new cultural centers and new modernist milieus in the 1910s. Of course, the process was cut short in 1920s due to the Bolshevik annexation of both countries and both cities, but that will be the end of our story. So, but we will try to begin our story from the processes happening in the 19th century. And there are some essential similarities and in the process of development in the 19th century also. In the 19th century and early decades of the 20th century, the agendas of societal and political modernization and implementation of modernist cultural style not only coincide chronologically, but also are interrelated and interdependent. In different cities and in different empires in this central or peripheral Europe, these agendas are also related to the goals of nations' self-identification and national consolidation on the one hand, while on the other, this process is usually undergoing in a multicultural environment and multinational environment. These factors are all present when we discuss the Tbilisi and Odessa cases. During the long historic existence of Georgian ethno-national and cultural identity, as well as Georgia as a state, Western integrity was mostly seen as a desirable space for country's political and cultural context. Due to geographical locations and cultural diversity, Georgia is often mentioned as a country on the crossroads of civilizations and cultures. Knowledge and interest of both Western and Eastern cultures was present in Georgia during the centuries. However, we may observe that historically the period of Eastern cultural influences are mostly related with political domination of Eastern superstates, while the Western European cultural interest is expressed as natural and free choice of Georgian nation in history, not only conditioned by any political dependence. The Tbilisi case can be compared with Odessa by means of few features. Both cities have been connected to Russian metropolis, and their development is on the one hand coordinated from the Russian center and on the other formed while opposing to it. Tbilisi has a strong historic and ongoing role of Georgia's political and cultural center, as Georgia's political and cultural center. At the same time, maintaining its traditional multicultural features of city on the geographic and cultural crossroads. While Odessa is developing its new role as a multicultural and multi-ethnic city, becoming also the emerging center for the Jewish community. Since the early 19th century, the Georgian capital Tbilisi is an administrative and economic center of Transcaucasia within the Russian Empire, and Odessa emerged as a new multi-ethnic boomtown on the Black Sea. While the Russian capital is reached from Tbilisi via the Georgian military road, the European commercial and cultural novelties are brought here to Tbilisi through Georgian Black Sea ports via Odessa. The commonalities and interrelations in the process of development of Odessa and Tbilisi start in mid-19th century, and they are, of course, associated with one concrete person, Field Marshal Prince Mikhail Semyonovich Vorontsov. So you have all seen his images, of course, but let me address his portraits again. So Mikhail Vorontsov had his affiliation with two cities, Odessa and Tbilisi. We all know that, of course, but still we can now see, when we discuss the commonalities of the development of Odessa and Tbilisi, we can now see that these two models of development are very much interrelated and very much connected to Vorontsov's personality, of course. On May 1823, he was appointed Governor General of New Russia, as the southern provinces of the empire were then called the Namestnik of Bessarabia. And later, in 1844, he was appointed as viceroy and governor of Caucasus. So we can see that Vorontsov brought his ideas and his approaches to the development of the cities and nations in the borders and in the as a commonwealth or either as a subalterns of the Russian Empire. So Vorontsov transformed Odessa into the trade city in South Russia, and he initiated projects which he later doubled in the Tbilisi. So opening of the public library in Odessa, or development of free trade atmosphere, and also the development of cultural projects was something that he had tested in Odessa, and then while his rule in the Caucasus in 1844 and till 1854, he actually applied to his own experience, which he had performed in Odessa, and did the same in Tbilisi. So in place of previous viceroys and rulers of the Caucasus and Tbilisi, so let me mention again that Tbilisi at that time was the administrative center of the whole Caucasus Empire, whole Caucasus province of the Russian Empire, Transcaucasia, and later Northern Caucasus, which was actually brought into the borders of the Russian Empire thanks to or due to Vorontsov's military activities, as well as his managerial activities as a viceroy. So in place of Harsh Paskevich, who was ruling the Caucasus before him, decades earlier, and corrupted Paulich, Prince Mikhail Semyonovich Vorontsov was sent to to develop the new policy. I mean, cultural policy, of course, but also the approach to the managerial activities, which were oriented towards transforming Tbilisi as a platform for Russia's eastern military activities and Russia's eastern military ambitions. So Russia, thanks to having the platform in Tbilisi, actually conquered the Northern Caucasus as we know it. And on the other hand, Russia had two essential military campaigns against Turkey and Persia. And of course, Georgia's existence as a platform was essential in this. So we can see that Vorontsov is developing his cultural policy as well as his military and managerial policies based on his approach to the goals, how to govern and how to rule the subaltern of Georgia, to make it a more acceptable partner to Russian center, and on the other hand, to make the Russian center as more acceptable partner to Georgia. The story of Georgia becoming the part of Russian Empire is quite controversially told in Russian narrative and on the other hand in Georgian national narrative. To Georgia, it's a forcible process. In 1801, Russia violated the treaty, the Georgian Treaty, which was made by Georgia and Russia in 1883 as a military partnership and as well as international political partnership. But Russia then abolished the rule of Georgian royal dynasty, Bagrationi dynasty, as well as Russia abolished the autocephaly of Georgian Orthodox Church and made Georgia as one of the provinces. So Georgia was divided into two counties, Tbilisi and Kutaisi counties, and Tbilisi was made the, as I mentioned before, administrative center of Russia. At that time, in the early 18th century, of course, in the early 19th century, of course, Georgians do not want to get used to this reality, and they have different there are different uprisings, and as well as in 1832 there was a plot of Georgian aristocracy against the Russian governance and against Russian annexation and colonization of Georgia. But still, when Vorontsov comes to Georgia, some words, and on the other hand, he is creating some interesting, of course, and very positive cultural projects, thanks to which he is still positively remembered in Georgia and in Tbilisi. Vorontsov negotiated with Tbilisi merchant brothers, Tamamshevs, and gave the land for free so that they built an opera building and caravanserai as an architectural ensemble. In 1852, Alexander Dumas, traveling to the Caucasus, mentioned that he found the opera building as most elegant building, and Vorontsov brought to Tbilisi Italian Opera Company. In 1851, the Opera House, Tbilisi Opera launched its existence with the performance of Donizetti's Lucia della Milmur. Unfortunately, the old building of Tbilisi Opera House was actually burned 74, and the new building which was erected in 1897 is a continuation of the legacy of Vorontsov's opera house, definitely. And Vorontsov also opened a public library in Tbilisi, and he supported some trade activities, and the population of Tbilisi doubled within 10 years of Vorontsov's rule, and revenue of Tbilisi grew 6 times thanks to his economic policy. But of course, Georgian aristocracy was realizing that this was all this positive surface was a part of Russia's imperial policy. But still, Vorontsov was very much praised in Georgia. Here you can see the monument to Vorontsov, which was erected later in the second half of the 19th century, and of course destroyed, removed by Soviets in the 1920s. But there is one interesting fragment in the memoirs of Georgian national poet Akaki Tsereteli, which mentions how he and his family prized Vorontsov's memory while visiting the widow in Odessa. Actually, when Vorontsov was retired in 1853, he moved back to Odessa, where he died in few years, and the widow, Polish Countess Brinska, continued living in Odessa when in 1858 Akaki Tsereteli visited Branitska. Akaki Tsereteli visited her. Akaki mentions in his memoirs my story that which was developed in the which was ended in 1908. So Akaki is quite much accomplished poet. By that period, he is already regarded as Georgian national poet, but his visit to Vorontsov's widow is one important passage in his memoirs. He's saying how his family decided to send him to St. Petersburg for his university education, not via Georgia's military road, but via the Black Sea, in order to be in Odessa and visit Vorontsov's widow. So Akaki Tsereteli recalls this visit with great warmth, and widow was extremely generous to him. But it's interesting how the widow, how Akaki Tsereteli, already very nationally minded young person, recalls this dialogue between him and the widow. The widow said that this small Georgia, she recalls the words by Vorontsov, this small Georgia will be the most beautiful and durable golden fabric in the textile composition of Great Russia. We only have to lead them and let them develop while supporting them outside. So then she addressed Akaki, now you young Georgians have to meet my husband's hopes and expectations. Of course, Akaki Tsereteli says that he insisted with the fact that Vorontsov will be always remembered in Georgia with gratitude for his activities and his deeds. So later, or actually, synchronically in that period, Georgian Romanticist writer Alexander Orbeliani recalls to the process initiated, cultural policy initiated by Vorontsov, saying that this was actually the surface, although Georgians were, I quote him, although Georgians were grateful for having the divine man as a head of the province, I knew it was all fake on behalf of Vorontsov. He wanted Georgians to be entertained, enjoying their time, and to forget all negative thoughts about the government and Russian Empire, of course. While Shamil and Dagestan, 2 minutes. While Shamil and Dagestan were strong, he was afraid of Georgians, but with his cunning mind, he weakened and put to end Georgians' resistance and stayed in slavery of Russians as it was before. So we can definitely say that Vorontsov's activities helped Odessa as well as Tbilisi to be more Europeanized. He himself was raised and educated in London since his father was ambassador to British Empire, and of course he was bringing European spirit to Russian Empire. If we remember Orlando Fage's important book, cultural history of Russia, told in his book Natasha's Dance, sense, we can see that Russia's project of creating European surface was actually associated with Russia's imperial agenda. Tbilisi continued the European project by creating new modernist activities in 1910s. So it's definitely due to Georgian people's cultural position and not, of course, imperial project, but still we think that this multicultural and multi-ethnic atmosphere, which was always characteristic to Tbilisi from early medieval centuries. The city was founded in the 5th century as a replacement to Georgia's ancient capital, and since then the city is on the crossroad of Silk Road, and it's always used to be multicultural. We can say that Odessa and Tbilisi both developed such an interesting modernist milieu thanks to their multicultural and multi-ethnic spirit. In 1915-1916, Georgia's first modernist activities started to appear first in Kutaisi, but then they were switched to Tbilisi. The group of Blue Horners, all of them switched to came to Tbilisi to continue their activities. And at that time, Tbilisi is already a capital of the Georgian Democratic Republic, which was a very short but very bright moment in Georgia's 20th century history. Actually, it was a state experience, democratic state experience, on which Georgia based its free nation national development and state project in the end of the 20th century after the collapse of the USSR. But modernist cultural milieu in Georgia, in Tbilisi, was not mono-ethnic. It was multi-ethnic and multicultural, and also the modernist poets and artists, avant-garde artists, all over the Russian Empire, and especially from Moscow and St. Petersburg, were coming to Tbilisi to join Georgian modernists. But actually, first voices of futurist, yes, I have to finish, yes. First voices of Georgian, Russian futurists were brought to Tbilisi by Mayakovsky and David Burlyuk in their South Russian tour, and actually they traveled from Odessa to Tbilisi, bringing their interesting voices to Georgia. And it's also interesting to mention that many technical novelties are brought to Tbilisi from Odessa, since the first movie theater was opened here. So first movie shootings were conducted in Tbilisi earlier in the end of the 19th century, but still in 1908, first movie theater was opened here by a businesswoman from Odessa, Sofia Ivanitskaya. We can definitely say that multicultural and multi-ethnic atmosphere of two cities, their location on the Black Sea and the open atmosphere is important in while their development in the early 20th, in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and the network between Odessa and Tbilisi is something important while discussing the cultural and also economical exchange and exchange of national ideas between two cities and two nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bela, for a fascinating zoom in into life of Tbilisi, and really it's very interesting. And I remind everybody to send me questions. I myself have some questions, and we have discussion later. And now, Zaur, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. I will try now to share my small presentation. Okay, here on the so is it seeable, so to say? Yeah, great. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. Special thanks goes to Media Letske, so thank you very much. And and to others, thank you for moderation, and to all others in Jerusalem also for making that possible. I will try to focus on 3 works and on some, and at the very start on some theoretical reflections with regard to cosmopolitanism and Baku. And having heard, of course, 2 days of very, very fascinating papers on Odessa, so I will try to merge it somehow. Yeah, I guess at the very start, the notion of cosmopolitanism should be rethought or revisited, and we're doing that. So with regard to Odessa, and what I feel that cosmopolitanism is seemingly nothing eternal, nothing imminent. Maybe it's a sort of a momentum, something what is in time and space limited. At least for the case of Baku, is that's obvious. It's about urban spaces and about the city, and even not a town. Very important is who are the cosmopolitan agents. Is cosmopolitanism the same like multiculturalism, and is a fact of the coexistence of different ethnic groups or people from a different background, ethnic confessional background in one place, in one urban scape? Is that enough to call it cosmopolitan? Is cosmopolitan the entire population at that moment and that urban space, or it's a sort of an intellectual sitting in salon and reading newspapers in different languages and conversing with people on this and that, and being a jour of what is happening in culture in the leading metropolis of the world, and so on and so on. Is that talking about Eastern Europe? Is that this kind of cosmopolitan author? Is that Kafka, or is that more Ludwig Zamenhof, the creator of Esperanto? But what is common also for Tbilisi and for Odessa and for Baku is the fact that all these cityscapes are on the borderland, on the frontier, close to frontier of their own, let us say, sort of state or ethnic group, but also of the empires they were included in. Very important are these trans-imperial and inter-imperial interactions, what we see around the Great Black Sea, maybe Great Black Sea region, which also encompasses the parts of Caucasia and Caspian Sea region, and intercultural communication. And what I thought about is a sort of an altering type of cosmopolitanism and of also cosmopolites maybe as well. So at the end, what emerged is a text written by the scholars, and is our ability to describe cosmopolitanism also altering with regard to the aspect what we are able to see and what we see through our lens. So all these aspects, I guess, are of importance. So you see here a postcard from the turn of the century in with a short text about Baku in Russian and in French, and actually the sides of the city depicted on this postcard, that was a town. Baku was a very small town on the eve of the oil boom in the midst of the 19th century. One would say maybe nothing special, so just a town at the seashore. And this town had a population of about 10,000 people, Shia Muslim majority, Jewish minority, mostly Tats living there, or mountainous Jews, with regard to the local Jewry. And this town mutated like within of within of several decades into a oil metropolis of the Russian Empire. And what in French is called bouleversement. So it was a complete internal explosion of the actual of a town into the city. So what is important here, and maybe that's the most important thing, is the imperial context. So without empire, without oil boom, this kind of transformations, this kind of mutation wouldn't occur. So it's the imperial contest that creates cosmopolitan moments and destroys them at the end, because the empire, the imperial essence, is not interested on any kind of cosmopolitanism. So it's about acculturation and about assimilation. So it's not about cosmopolitanism. Cosmopolitanism can emerge when certain dynamics function like they function, and these small islands, intellectual islands, emerge in on this kind of borderline. So it's a lot about languages, about language policy. And also this postcard should be read in these terms of languages and language policy. And that alters as well in time and space. And so here you see one receipt from the train receipt from the Soviet Baku from the 57. So you see here again two languages, Azeri written in Cyrillic and Russian. So it's still Azeri is written there, because in the constitution of the Azeri Soviet Socialist Republic, the Azeri language had a status along with Armenia and with Georgia. So that was a specific feature of the Caucasian republics in the Soviet time. It was not the case in other parts of the Soviet Union, but still you see here the linguistic mirroring maybe of the Soviet Empire. I will try to describe the cosmopolitan moments emerged by the empire and destroyed by the empire as the example of three works. One of them was written in French by the Azeri immigrant female author Banin or Banu Asadullayev, Jour Caucasien. It was published in 1945 in Paris. Just shortly to her background, a daughter of over-wealthy oil tycoon family in Baku. She was born in at the start of 1902 or 1905, and she left the Sovietized Baku in the early 20s. And moved firstly to Istanbul, got the French visa, and then she left for France. She joined the intellectual milieu of Paris. She was fluent in French, in German, and in Russian. She got all this education in the imperial Baku at the turn of the century. She had the German babysitter. And Banin wrote her Jour Caucasien. It is one of the novels she has written. So another novel dealt with France and criticized the French attitude towards foreigners, for instance. And another novel was about J'ai choisi l'opium. I chose the opium, about her conversion to Catholicism. And so she was a very, very broad personality and reflected on many issues. So her autobiography was one of the topics she was thinking about. But what is striking in this work, how she describes the going on in Imperial Baku at the start of the 20th century within of the very, very rich oil tycoons world. So she didn't speak any Azeri, and it was not taught at home. And I guess her father wasn't communicating with her much, so she was all the time with her French and German and Russian babysitters or private teachers, repetitors, and so on and so on. And she developed a very interesting relationship towards Azeri language as a sort of ancestral folkloristic background of the street. So you see here like class, somehow a class of privileged attitude towards the local languages, what we know from the colonialized world, enough from the works of Assia Jabbar. And so you can read Banin Caucasian also through the post-colonial lens. But she saw herself as somebody coming from Baku, from the Azeri oil tycoon family, but her knowledge and awareness of the local traditions and linguistic affinities was very, very limited. And one could say that she was an example of one century of Russian rule, Tsarist rule, of integration of the wealthy stratum into the Russian kupечество in that case, maybe, and quite strongly déraciné with this regard. If we jump to the second work, which was written in German originally at the end of 30s, that's a quite famous work, also with the Georgian Azeri context. The Ali und Nino, the author was a Baku-born Jewish intellectual who converted later on to Islam. So we see in case of Banin from Islam or from initial Islamic background to Catholicism, in case of Kurban Said from to Islam later in Italy. And he describes a love story between an Azeri guy, Ali, and a Georgian aristocrat, young lady, Nino. And you see in his novel, Baku, Tbilisi, the entire Caucasus emerged there with the biggest ethnic groups, with Armenians, Georgians, Azeris, Russians, Persians. So everything comes together over there, and the mise en scène of the oeuvre is the entire region, the studious travels here and there. So it's partly self-orientalizing novel, but showing in a very positive way the ethnic richness of the region and overcoming the confessional cleavages and so on. And Russian school and Russian language emerged here, like it was in the autobiographical novel of Banin, as a place where the representatives of different ethnic groups come together. So Russian language emerged in this work as a sort of koine, as a sort of a lingua franca of a certain class. So it was not about like the language of all proletarians, or it was not the appeal to learn Russian only because it was spoken by Lenin, but Russian was here the language of elites. And now I jump through time and looking at time I have still to the third novel. It was written in Azeri and published in 2009. Artush and Zaur was a title, Legend of Love. It was written by Ali Akper, by the quite young, I guess now he's in his 40s, so can be considered a young author. He's Baku-born, and the novel is the first gay novel in Azeri literature, and deals with two taboo topics. So that describes a love story between one Armenian man and one Azeri man. Both of them are Bakuvites. They were born in Baku. Some went in at the end of 70s or at the start of 80s, so still before the perestroika started and before the conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh started. So what we see in the novel of Ilia, that he creates a liaison to his forerunners. So Ali and Nino plays here a huge role. He depicts, the novel starts in Tbilisi, so Tbilisi is an important melting pot. It's also even a place, an important mise-en-scène for the for making this relationship possible. So the plot is the following. Artush was born into an Armenian family in Baku and Zaur into an Azeri family, and they were friends, and they went to the same school, by the way, to the Russian school in Baku, and their parents knew each other, and they used to mark the festivities, the holidays all together. And we come here to this canon of the Soviet culture of the 60s and 70s with Stolichny Salat, with Olivier, with all this cuisine stuff, food stuff, and also common anecdotes. Of course, their majority was in Russian, but he describes how spending the time together, the mothers of both of Artush and Zaur used to sing Armenian and Azeri songs. But the plot was in Russian. The Russian was a communication between the both when they fall in love, being I guess advanced school children at school, and then came the war, then came the separation, and years later they meet each other in Tbilisi. So the Tbilisi is described by Ilia not only as the place of meeting, of coming together. It's also the place where they had their intercourse. They came together. They had Tbilisi is the city of the passionate love between these two men, and the bath culture of Tbilisi. The traditional baths were portrayed as a place. Sorry?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, thank you. So that was a very, very certain place of the Georgian capital here. What is striking in the third novel, that he criticizes somehow the what was thought to be a cosmopolitan culture, but at the end, this cosmopolitanism, which consisted of some common food and coming together, actually meant the diminishment of the importance of local cultures in the urban space and urban scape of Baku. So Armenians living in Baku got Russified, part of Azeris living there got Russified, and the same went also to many other nationalities. So the bringing together the whole nationalities to work on the oil rocks a century ago created a cosmopolitan moment when they came together, learned the languages of each other, and the fantastic phenomenons came together, like Lev Landau, Rostropovich, Kasparov, and so on, so on. So you can describe them as the representatives of this Baku world of Bakintsy. But the end meant actually that thousands of Armenians after the conflict started moved from Baku not to Armenia but to Russia, and partly because of the language and so on. And at the very end, I would jump into the topic what we have described so intensively in the last 2 and 3 days, talking about the post-Soviet perception of the multi-cultural cosmopolitan myth or recalling of the Soviet past. There are two things. On the link you see here the book that was written by one author who is a quite important moderator, public person in Azerbaijan. That was a book written also in Russian for kids. Jerusalem for Kids. I looked what kind of books he has written. So, and you see that Jerusalem was one of 5-6 books. So there is one book about Moscow, about Tbilisi, about Istanbul, and another was about Jerusalem. To the big extent, it's connected with the very important role and place of the Jewish community in the present day Baku as well. And to the right, I just found out that yesterday it's a painting painted a couple of years ago. It's called a Jewish wedding in a Jewish quarter of Baku. And I looked at the painting and trying to localize it, and I couldn't because it could take place in every district of the urban scape. So it's that way it's nothing special. So at this point, I would finish, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Zaur, for this wonderful presentation and review of 4 different cross-cultural books. And our third participant of this panel, Vera Skvirskaya, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. And I also would like to thank the organizers for their efforts of making this thing happen despite such a long delay. So hopefully there will be an opportunity to meet in person one day, who knows. So my paper is based primarily on the ethnographic research that I have conducted in Odessa over the last 15 years. And I don't have a PowerPoint, I have to apologize. And I'm also very grateful to the previous presenter, to Zaur, for providing this kind of background introduction to the various ideas of cosmopolitanism and how we can think about it. And I think what I'm trying to do here today is to kind of talk about present day cosmopolitanism on the margins of the mainstream Odessan society. But I also, of course, would like to historicize a little bit this phenomenon. And as probably most of you know, quite a lot of literature on cosmopolitan dynamic of the city relates to the idea of trade cosmopolitanism. And it's always kind of covers this pre-Soviet Russian imperial past where different groups cooperated or competed with each other for resources, for spheres of influence, and for trade connections. And then we have this kind of gap that is the Soviet period, you know, it's a command economy. But actually quite a lot of this trade cosmopolitanism has survived under the Soviets and was quite actually flourishing. And just to give you one preliminary example is a cooperation between the Jewish and the Roma inhabitants of the city. Or rather, Roma inhabitants, I mean, they were sort of partially located outside Odessa, so we can't call them like proper Odessans, but nonetheless. So quite a lot of illegal or kind of this gray workshops were located in Odessa where Jewish residents produced these fake copies or just Western style clothes that were very popular. And there were these big networks of distributions that were managed by the Roma. So it was kind of one direction of this cooperation. But it also worked in other ways where Roma supplied horses to the Odessan Jews that were later used on hippodromes or as tourist attraction. So this is just kind of a very short illustration that this trade cosmopolitan dynamic, that is to say cooperation across different religious or ethnic groups, was taking place during the Soviet period. And I was interested to see how this is taking place today in the present-day Odessa. And maybe some of you know there is a huge outdoor 7-kilometer market located just outside the city that is like the major kind of global hub, so to speak, in Eastern Europe. So there are a lot of traders from all over the world. But because it's such a huge field, I will just focus on one particular group that is like a group of Turkish migrants, and the way this new migration kind of relates and reinvigorates in many ways the legacy of the Ottoman connections. So I will also talk about continuities with the Ottoman past and this and the presence of the relatively new Muslim population in the city. So those networks that I just mentioned that were valid in the Soviet period, they largely disappeared. I would say they disappeared due to this mass out-migration of the Jewish population, but also other ethnic groups like Germans and Greeks. So today this is properly globalized, first of all, due to the presence of this market. And during the last 3 decades, there were new waves of international foreign migrants coming to the city. One of the very first groups that came to the city were Turks. So while the locals began to Istanbul to buy different things to sell on the local markets, it's kind of opened up a window for the entrepreneurs, small traders, individual traders from Turkey to come to Odessa. And of course, quite a lot of these people, they just came in with relatively short visit. They made this big bucks and they disappeared. But there were also many that actually stayed behind, both in the market and the young. So gradually, both Turkish small businessmen and transnational companies have established a foothold in the city itself. And with the money and contacts made on the 7-kilometer market, some former Turkish traders have opened up different restaurants, halal butchers, clothing shops, barbers, small factories, and bakers and cafes in Odessa itself. And I would like to look closer at this very heterogeneous Turkish community in Odessa that has emerged as a result of this individual migration and more organized importation and migration of Turkish workers and specialists. And those Turkish workers and specialists were also invited by Ukrainian and Odessan enterprises. And here we're talking mainly about construction business, but also about telecommunications. But this story, anyway, starts with the Odessan countryside. So in the countryside, we have very distant groups that demarcated ethnic minorities by the modern pre-Soviet and Soviet state. That is to say, this kind of degree of uncertainty, who you are, which group you belong, was eliminated by the modernist techniques. So here, in addition to the Ukrainian-speaking population, so to the old believers and Bulgars and Moldovans, there are also villages with high concentration of Turkish-speaking Orthodox, Gagauz, for example, who together with other Orthodox groups came from the Balkans and were known in Tsarist Russia as Volga colonists. There are also much more recent newcomers, or relatively more recent newcomers, Meskhetian Turks, who arrived as refugees and migrants from the conflict zone of the former Soviet Union. So they arrived in 1989 at the very end of the Soviet Union, beginning like of this post-socialist period, fleeing mainly from the pogroms in Uzbekistan. But they ended up in Uzbekistan as refugees from Georgia. That is to say, Meskhetian Turks were deported from Meskhetiya, now it's known as Javakheti, a part of southern Georgia that borders Turkey, to Uzbekistan in 1944. So it was part of the Stalinist resettlement policy. So now we have all these different groups kind of ending up around Odessa. So this multilingual countryside embodies the legacy and territoriality of Ottoman ecumenical communities and population movements that once linked the Russian, the Ottoman empires together. And since the Soviets, the original stories of both the Gagauz and the Meskhetian Turks have become very politicized, and they were kind of centered on the very competing narratives of identification and true forms of belongings. For example, these Meskhetian Turks, were they just Georgians converted to Islam, or were they actually the Turkish minority? Like, who knows? But I will have to skip all this discussion because we don't have enough time. And just say that it seems to me that at present, the Turkish origin story predominates. That is to say, also maybe for pragmatic reason, it's good to be Turkish, so to speak. It gives people quite a lot of new opportunities. And for my, for example, well-educated Gagauzan informants in Odessa, there were absolutely no doubts that they were descendants from Turks and that they used to belong to the Ottoman world as subject in the past. And Meskhetian Turks, they turned to refer to themselves as Ehiska Turks. And precisely this way of self-naming, so to speak, is a way to signaling their Turkishness. So for my interlocutors' language, their mother tongue functions as a key parameter for ethnic self-identification, not religion, and for conceptualizing their cultural affinities. So for this Turkish-speaking minorities, their proficiency in Turkish language or the relative ease compared to the Slav population with which they can learn Turkish, and as well as some cultural traits they claim they share with Turks, some certain norms of gender relations, certain kind of patriarchal structure, both provide and promise new opportunities in the present-day Odessa. So the local Turkish-speaking groups ended up in Odessa and Odessa region as a result of these multiple waves of migration. And their current regional localization is a product of these intertwining histories. And they are now comprising these new networks with the newcomer Turkish migrants based on the language and cultural affinities that they claim. At the same time, while we have this kind of new dynamic and new networking going on, it seems to me that the majority, kind of the mainstream Odessan society, kind of turns a blind eye on what's going on. So they still claim, or at least until 2014, when most part of this research was done, they were claiming European identity. You know, now Europe is a bit more problematic, but at that time, like in 2014, the city was inherently European. The xenophobia and racism were publicly condemned, of course, but at the same time, on the kind of everyday level, everyday communication, Turks were the blacks, right? Turks were Muslims, they were suspect, they were dangerous. So even though the Turks will come to Odessa and they will drink and go out and organize clubs, they own quite a lot of clubs in Odessa, they will still kind of be seen as threatening Islamists. And of course, Turkish migrants, they were well aware of these attitudes themselves. You know, there was also kind of this mutual suspicion present. So, but they had to somehow survive in the city as well. So they start engaging in this kind of very intense multiple alliances with the Turkish-speaking minorities that they could find in Odessa. And this new Turkish, what they call ecumenical communities, they became reconfigured and realigned through various contact zones at workplaces, at nightclubs, in diasporic organization, and newly established religious networks. Some Turkish migrants come to historicize these relations in new ways. They say, well, I mean, it's actually quite interesting to meet all those local Turks, you know, whoever they are, whatever religion they have, because it shows that this territory used to be ours. You know, we kind of like homecoming in a sense for us. We were not expecting this to happen, but we met those groups, these local Odessan groups, and now we feel that actually, you know, this is like an evidence of our, like, these lands were once ours. And it's also quite important, I think, to point out that much closer ties of sociality and commercial relations are often established between these Turks, like Turkish migrants from Turkey, and these local Turkish minorities, than between the Turkish migrants themselves. Because all these Turkish migrants come to Odessa, they actually represent very different groups within Turkey, and some of these groups are quite hostile towards each other. So they represent all these various divisions in the Turkish society. For example, there are quite a lot of Turkish Kurds, and so this is kind of this dynamic Turks and Turkish Kurds. It's not always works very well at the market or in businesses in town. So right now it looks like many shop owners as well as Turkish companies are looking, first of all, for people who can speak Turkish and share some cultural dispositions that they can relate to. So for this reason, local Turkish-speaking minorities and Turkish migrants are often hired at a preferential rate compared to the local Slavs or Bulgar groups, for example. Because besides the language, there is also another reason why, for example, Slavs are initially excluded from Turkish businesses. There is not just a degree of distrust and this understanding of racial stereotypes, a kind of awareness of this racial stereotypes, but it's also a question of that Russians or Ukrainians, kind of Slav groups, they just don't read the cultural codes properly. So on one hand, you have the work ethics, the language, but on the other hand, like, as soon as you establish a more friendly relationship, it's kind of this very Turkish-like hierarchies, they are not respected. This kind of friendliness override the implicit hierarchies, and the Turkish minorities are well aware of those hierarchies, but the local Odessans, they are kind of not familiar with them. So, and since I interviewed mainly the Turkish migrant and Turkish minorities in this respect, they talk about it as an example of Slav mentality that doesn't fit with what they are doing there. So one can say that this multi-ethnic war collective of Turkish companies in Odessa, they kind of perpetuate this long-term alliances with the local Turkish-speaking minorities, and they themselves exemplifies the heterogeneous nature of the ecumenical community that they help to constitute. And there is another very interesting and I think important dimension of these relations, of this Turkish ecumenical community that we can find in Odessa today, and it consists of cross-border network. There is a Turkish mosque in Odessa, a relatively new Turkish mosque established by a Turkish businessman, and it's the only one in Odessa that has a Turkish-speaking imam. And the mosque has also a madrasa and draws pupils mainly from local families, not so many from the families of Turkish migrants, actually. There are especially many followers of this particular imam amongst the Tatars who comes from Crimea to work in Odessa. It's another kind of migratory link. So this madrasa is said to offer very good education in addition to religious studies, and also gives classes in Turkish, Arabic, and English languages. It makes it popular. But the Turkish mosque is a kind of controversial place. It's one of those contact sites that both fragments the migrant community and promotes contact outside it. Because even some observant Muslims among my interlocutors, for them, this mosque was a place to avoid because it propagated a too narrow-minded version of Islam. And but I mean, it of course also helped to facilitate some further networking within the Muslim communities. But for those Turkish migrants who found this Turkish imam a bit to be a bit too much, Odessa was a site of discovery of a new network of religiosity. And it was in Odessa that some of my informants, for the first time in their lives, also came from Istanbul and other big cities in Turkey, actually met the followers of Gulen, Fethullah Gulen, who calls themselves liberal democratic Muslims. So some eventually became followers of Gulen himself. And this membership, this religious membership, brought them in touch with a kind of very narrow new strata of Turkish intelligentsia in Odessa, many of whom work today for the Turkish school, so-called Chernomorsky Lycey, Black Sea Lyceum, one of the best educational establishment in Odessa at that level. So, but via this Lyceum, so I'm just jumping from one thing, via this connection, they came in touch with the Meskhetian Turks, because all the religious events, all the religious holidays that they celebrate, they are organized and facilitated by the communities of these Ahiska Turks who came from Uzbekistan, who initially came from Georgia. So it's provided a new context for a geographical connectivity with this kind of very dispersed and previously unfamiliar Turkish-speaking population. So just to wrap up, I mean, it was a very kind of brief overview of this new urban network and new urban kind of cosmopolitanism at the margins of the urban Odessan society that highlights some legacies of the Ottoman connections, as well as variant divisions within the Turkish migrant community and their diverse forms of alliances with the local minorities. And these forms of engagement, as I already mentioned, are barely known to the ordinary Odessans and are barely incorporated in the Odessan myth of cosmopolitan society and urban coexistence. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Vera. You even ahead of time. Yeah, thank you. Very interesting about Turkish community of present-day Odessa. We have about 20 minutes for discussion, and we have 2 questions in our chat. First question is to Bela. The question from Milieu. Can you elaborate on the role of commercialization and modern technologies that are so important and self-reflectively addressed for Odessa modernism? What role did they play in Tbilisi? It's a question to Bela.
Well, thank you very much, Milieu, for this question. I didn't have enough time to address that issue. Of course, commercialization is important in the development, including cultural development of any country and any milieu. But in Georgian case, I would say that commercial segment, commercialized segment and cultural segment were quite much apart. Already in the 19th century, that was due to cultural and also ethical issues. The role of commercial actors was given in Georgia and in Tbilisi, namely to Armenian population, Armenian citizens of Tbilisi, which always inhabited the city. So we don't have to that with the Armenian community, which migrated to Georgia in 19th century from Turkey, from conflict zones. So Armenian and Azeri communities migrated and joined Georgian population in 19th century. That is not the individuals. They're not the individuals which contributed to the economic development of Tbilisi in the 19th century. Were Armenian merchants, they had a guild of merchants, and somehow an aristocracy and nationally minded Georgians and Armenians had a cooperation because Georgians used to lend money from Armenians. But what we have as a modernist cultural milieu in the early 20th century, they are doing their job mostly without the real commercial support and without any real connection to economic field. They are just gathering in the very small environments in the artistic cafes, which were opened in Tbilisi in 1910s in the time of Georgian Free Democratic Republic as an analog of St. Petersburg artistic cafes, including Bradiacha, Sabaka. So many artistic cafes were very small, but somehow it was poets to recall that it was a miracle that instead of 50 people, 100 people could fit those spaces. And their journals and newspapers didn't have much funding either, but still they were publishing own journals, own small books and pamphlets. So economic development, industrialism was not that much reflected in this cultural process. But of course, the free atmosphere of the country was, and also in the times of First World War, not that much economic achievements could be performed in Georgia, although it was a free democratic state. Still, economically, it was backward, but there was plenty of food and wine. So this was enough for poets and artists to feel happy.
Okay, thank you. We have a question to Zaur, also from Milieu. That there is also an Azerbaijani writer school in 2000 in Moscow. Is this a kind of imperial phenomenon or something else?
Thank you very much. In 2000, the Azeri writer in Moscow, was it the Chingiz Guseynov or who is meant, or Chingiz Abdullayev?
Afanasy Mamedov and others.
That is an interesting phenomenon. I don't know. I guess not explored enough. Russophone literature that emerged, I would say, in 60s, 70s more, literary works written by the local writers. There was even poetry written in Russian as well. And Afanasy Mamedov is one of the examples. I don't know how old is he or to which generation he belonged, but
in his 50s, I think.
He belongs to the group. There are representatives of. There was an example of bilingual writing also, and Chingiz Guseynov is one of the examples that he wrote his initial works in Azeri, and then he moved, so to say, and wrote in Russian. There was a debate in the 90s in the Writers' Union, what to accept as Azeri literature and what not. So if a work was written in Azerbaijan, but in Russian language or in other language, is it a part of the Azerbaijani literature or not, and so on. At the end, it was inclusive, so it was accepted as a part of Azeri literature. So that does still exist in Baku. And another example is Chingiz Abdullayev, who writes the detective stories, I guess, which are quite popular also in some milieus in Russia as well. And that is an interesting phenomenon, which leads to be compared or led to be compared with the literature maghrébine in a French Arab context with Algeria and Tunisia and so on.
Irena, you are muted.
Sorry, a question to Vera from Marina Sapolsky. When the Turkish newcomers say this territory was ours, what Ottoman connection do they describe in their efforts to root themselves to Odessa? Could you also elaborate what connection with Turkey do they uphold while they are living in Odessa? Do they visit Turkey regularly and engage in transnational business across the border or whatever?
Yes, thank you, Marina. Nice to see you there. Yeah, there is a very close connection. I mean, until very recently, until approximately 2010, there was a regular ferry connection between Odessa and Istanbul. And it was a very popular, very relatively cheap way of kind of going from one place to the other. Also, quite a lot of Turkish migrants in Odessa, until they get properly married or established in the cities, they go on this half a year, 3 months visas. Basically, they have to leave the country for a short period of time and come back. So actually, they are forced to go and visit whoever they want to visit and come back again. So they maintain very close relationship to their home country, if one can say so. And all this narrative about this part of Ukraine being ours, well, if one goes to Istanbul, one can still see some kind of signs and monuments, for example, about Sultan, this and that, grieving because he is still sad. He is sad in his heart because his land on the other side of the Black Sea now belongs to God knows who. So, I mean, people who live in Turkey, they're confronted with this idea constantly, but it's more kind of a mythological construction. When they go to Odessa, they recreate those sentiments, and this, of course, refers to the time pre-Russian Turkish wars, as I understand, before this area was taken over by the Catherine, like what was the 18th century, late 18th century. So that's what they mean. I think there is nothing more to that.
Okay, thank you. Question from Shmuel Barnae to Bela and Zaur, that we usually speak about positive aspects of multi-ethnicity or cosmopolitanism. Do you see any negative aspects in your cases of study?
Well, that's of course an issue when we when we start to think about national values, misunderstood national values, I would say, because in case of Tbilisi, culturally, economically, we can definitely say that multicultural environment had a very positive role in country's development and development of the capital per se. Unfortunately, in Soviet period, multicultural features of Tbilisi reality were not preserved due to Soviet national policy, of course, which was very different from what we had in 19th century still, and also in the times of Georgian Democratic Republic. Soviet national policy was a hybrid in post-colonial understanding of national discourse and Soviet imperial discourse, of course. But in resistance to Soviet imperial Russian discourse, Georgian culture developed its very monocultural features, and the spirit of multicultural interaction between different groups. And I would say that there were not only the groups which used to live in Tbilisi citizens, but of course many avant-gardists coming to Tbilisi in exile from Russia. As I mentioned in my paper, I did not have enough time to explore much about that, but anyway, that multicultural spirit was lost. I would say that the only real representative of that multicultural Tbilisi spirit is Sergei Parajanov, which is of course a very important cultural figure. I would say that is definitely a Tbilisi spirit which makes his films and his artist works, his collages so unique and so interesting. So then complications, and unfortunately that was lost in the Soviet period.
Thank you very much for your question. I would say that I don't see any negative elements or negative dynamics within of cosmopolitanism. Very often I don't see cosmopolitanism in a situation which can be described as a multi-ethnic one. And I guess Marc Auger delivered a fascinating work, Non-Lieu. I don't know how it was translated into English, spaces which are not spaces, or places which are not places. It's like, for instance, the hall where we are waiting for our suitcases arriving at the airport, so before Corona, before pandemic, flying somewhere. And we stand there, maybe hundreds of us, people of different backgrounds, ethnic, linguistic abilities, of different statehoods, but it doesn't mean that we talk with each other and we exchange ideas with each other. We can maybe observe us if we are not very tired after the flight, but it shouldn't be overestimated. And there are a lot of examples of the coexistence of the parallel societies and whatever, like it's called in sociology. But I guess there are very interesting developments, or there were interesting co-products, byproducts also of the imperial context, which could be read through the lens of the very, maybe also of positive developments. I come just back to what Bela told about the Soviet period, and I will try now to pick up maybe some positive things from the cultural coexistence at that time. There were, for instance, there was a tradition of bilingual singing. There are a lot of songs which were sung in half in the local language, in Georgian, in Armenian, in Azeri, and the second part in Russian language. Also, this famous Tbilisi, for instance, it had the Russian part and the Georgian part, and Muslim Agamayev, Rashid Beybotov, and many others. So they performed in different languages. So if I look now at the pop culture, at least in Azerbaijan, the only language that non-Azeri language that survived the end of the communist period is Juhoro, the language of the mountainous Jews. So there is a co-production and a very interesting cooperation also between Israeli and Azeri singers in this regard. But even Russian or many other languages that were used, also Armenian and then Georgian, so they, of course, somehow disappear from the agenda. So sometimes the imperial context maybe destroying the cosmopolitan identity and cosmopolitan milieux also gives birth to some dynamics, maybe without any plan and idea for that, which could be very positive for the emergence of the cosmopolitan culture and milieu. It's a polylinguistic one.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to ask a question in continuation to this question about a kind of model when we are talking about three cities, Odessa, Tbilisi, Baku, a kind of imperial model of creating of imperial space, which somewhere get out of order. And on these cities, in Odessa, in Baku, and in Tbilisi, the colorful, multi-ethnic, multicultural communities, they created their own vision of a kind of imperial periphery. I think that this question I am addressing to our three presenters. Okay, is it a kind of imperial model that it's got wrong somewhere, and it was recreated and anew on the cities themselves?
If I may start answering the question, of course, the relation of center and periphery is present while discussing the issues of this conference. And imperial model, Russian imperial model, as I wanted to suggest in my paper, was related with developing peripheral centers, peripheral active locuses like Odessa or Tbilisi or Baku. I mean, economic and administrative and cultural culturally active locuses. But on the other hand, in case of Tbilisi, definitely Tbilisi had an ambition of altering these central peripheral models and feeling itself as a center of own reality, own environment. And also Georgian modernists, for example, had a very clear goal of altering the central role of Russian capitals, St. Petersburg or Moscow, and suggest that to them the center of modernist cultural reality, modernist world is Paris. Of course, it's not surprise that Paris could be seen as a center. So they definitely wanted to replace this Russian model and imperial model, saying that we are now oriented towards French symbolism. We are taking the genuine symbolist tendency from France and not the Russian version of symbolism and modernism as we can see it in St. Petersburg and Moscow. Of course, there were much more real life relations with Russian modernists, including those coming to Tbilisi in the time of Free Democratic Republic, and also those coming in 20s, including Andrei Bela or Boris Pasternak, having this very close, friendly and artistic communication. So Tbilisi had an ambition to see itself as a center already in the Soviet times, because they were suggesting that Moscow is very much ideologized and Sovietized cultural milieu, while we are resistant to Russian influence and also to the Soviet ideological influence.
Okay, and two short commentaries from our other presenters, so we should keep our schedule.
Vera?
I just partially missed the beginning of the question, but I think if we think about it more ethnographically, because that's how I think about that question, I wouldn't say that there was this attempt to recreate the imperial model, against modernist imperial model on the periphery in a place like Odessa. It was a site of exile, and it's still, at least in representations that they perpetuated, was a place where it was a provincial site. That was to say, as soon as you have a chance to really be in the forefront of something like literary production, artistic production, you have to go somewhere else. So it was almost like a transit zone in a sense for this particular form of modernism, or this Western style of living that Odessa prided itself for so much, that you can always be this more relaxed Western style person, very different, let's say, from a person in St. Petersburg that always has to be buttoned up and straightened up and all that. So it has, of course, elements of both, but I still think it was more conceived of a kind of transit zone rather than a site that can counterbalance the real center.
Thank you for this view of ethnography, sociological view, Zaur, and towards to conclusion.
I will plead maybe and appeal for the broader concept and broader looking at the influences and reciproc impacts. At least as the example of Baku, that was the case. I would say that on the one influx, so it came from via St. Petersburg and Moscow also, because a huge number of composers later on, composers and ballet dancers and other representatives of the fields, so they were educated in Kiev or in Moscow or in St. Petersburg. From the literary point of view, Istanbul still was a very important impact giver for Azeri literature. There was a number of later on poets and writers were educated at the late Ottoman Istanbul University, and of course, with regard to particular to the poetry, still the entanglement with the Persianate world played a huge role, and we're coming back to the aspect of the polylinguistic ability of the cosmopolitan moments that intellectuals at that time, at the turn of the century at least, in Baku and also in Ganja, as a rule, they spoke several languages, Persian, Turkish, and were about to get aware of Russian culture also. That's an important issue. We have reactions on the death of Pushkin, for instance, on the death of Lermontov within of Azeri authors, and also of the Georgians, and the aspect of Tergdaleulny. It was also an aspect in the Georgian intellectual history. So this interaction with several poles. Of course, somewhere the ambition to create known one, but I would plead for the broader encirclement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to all our presenters. Very interesting discussion, which we can go on with the questions, but we have a break. Thank you very much. Really,
let me thank you, Irena. Let me thank you. It was wonderful. It was a wonderful session. Our three presenters